I'm Paul Elliott here with Hashrocket TV, and I'm sitting with Corey Haines. Corey, there's a big debate on RSpec versus test unit on the Twitters recently. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, for me, I love the fact that our community argues about things that aren't really that important. And we're arguing over what testing framework to use, not whether or not you should test. And so it's fun sort of to watch these arguments, but I think that the debate between the testing frameworks misses the whole point of why we're doing it. And it's not which testing framework you use as much as are you able to provide the value that the whole point of testing gives you.
Sure.
So as you move up sort of, I kind of call it the testing maturity stack, which is going from testing in order to fix bugs to testing to catch mistakes that you might make, which tends to happen while as you move to like test while and test first. Then as you move from test first to test driven, then the idea is to have it influence sort of the API of your individual objects and your services. And as you shift over, you get, I like to say that the difference between test first and test driven is when you have pain in your test and you find something difficult to test, what do you change? Do you change your test or do you change your design? And that's sort of the gradual progression from test first to test driven. The reasons we do this is to get the value of being able to work very quickly, to be able to maintain our code very easily, to get design benefits of small decoupled modules, because the point of all of this is not so that you can create software very rapidly, although you can doing these techniques, but to maintain that software over time. So if if you're working on a startup, you have to be very quick. But what you have to be able to be very quick is in the long term, in the month or the week. You need to be able to change your application. Eric Ries gave the keynote last night talking about the lean startup ideas, that you don't really know what it is you're going to be building. So you need to use a process that gives you the ability to rapidly change. All of the tools that we use are there to support that value of being able to rapidly change, to minimize the cost of change. So the testing tool that you use is only important if you say this testing tool provides more value when it comes time to change. And I think that for the most part, RSpec, I'm an RSpec guy, I've been using it for a long time. The very first Ruby code I ever wrote was pairing with David on RSpec. And so naturally I can use that tool to provide the value that I need.
Sure.
I know people who use test unit incredibly effectively to get that value. So you can't really say one's better than the other, or one is, okay, start with test unit and then move to RSpec. No, you need to get very proficient with one of them.
Right.
I think you need to be effective with both of them because they are a slightly different thought process.
I know I've given some talks on testing, and I try to use whatever tool that I feel like the audience is going to use, because the tool really isn't as important as the methodology behind it. Now, one of the big things that I've learned from talking to people at these conferences is that most people, they just don't test at all.
Yeah.
Despite how important and passionate this industry is about testing, the Ruby community, there's a lot of people that just aren't doing it. And a lot of the reasons I've heard for this is that my boss won't let me, there's no time in the schedule. What can we do to help those people in those situations? Help them to convince their management that it is important and that there should be time to do it.
Well, there's two parts to that. The first is it's none of your manager's business how you develop software. We're professional software developers, generally highly paid. We're hired because we're expected to know how to do something. And so saying that my manager won't let me is a cop-out. One of the problems in our industry is that we act like children. We wait for permission to do something that we know we should be doing. Now, the flip side of that if you choose to do something that is going to negatively impact the business, then you have to explain it and you have to justify it. You don't justify testing, you justify your skill level at testing. So if you are bad at testing, you're inexperienced at it, and it's going to slow you down doing a strict test-driven development approach, then you need to be able to justify it according to the needs and the values that your business demands of you.
Right. So given the difficulty of testing, a lot of people that work in those organizations, it's not part of the culture. Nobody there does it. They don't have people they can lean on that are in the next cube. They're in cubes. So what can you do to really get yourself up to speed so that you don't have that hump in the office?
Well, I think one of the things to understand is that you don't have to jump to hardcore TDD, and it's a message that hasn't been out there as much. But for those of us who have been doing it for a long time, you do go through this sort of phases of learning how to do it. Don't sit there and, if you've never tested before, try to drive your entire design through tests. You're going to take a huge productivity hit. Instead, what we need to do is we need to teach people how to gradually get there. So do automated testing. At the minimum, do automated testing. Then as you get more effective at it, start writing your tests first. Start writing your tests while. Start slowly moving there, because just having a suite of automated tests is going to give you value. And so slowly over time, you start noticing things about the technique that you can then feed back into it to improve your process and your practices. And to do this, of course, you have to take the time to practice. You have to, if you're learning a musical instrument, you don't go up on stage and play. That's the only time I play my guitar, is when I'm on stage. It's awful. You sit at home and you practice.
Right.
So in order to get better, you start off with the small little things, and then you slowly, as you become productive with those, you add on, start looking at, I've got 10 mocks in this test. Well, that's a pain. So go look out there, what are people doing to minimize that pain? And you notice that, maybe my method's doing too much. So you start fiddling around with that and going, well, maybe I need to separate this method out, split this out. And so really what we need to do as a community is start helping people understand that, provide mechanisms and really focused, directed practices to let them slowly build it up. Because at that point, you don't have to justify any of this. It's just, this is how a modern professional developer builds software.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. That's great. Now, I noticed you have a really awesome backpack.
I do have an awesome backpack.
Can you tell us a little bit about this?
I will.
What drove your backpack buying decision?
Well, it's Yoda.
Sure
naturally. What drove my backpack buying decision was that I would always go to conferences and have a big backpack that I travel with.
Much like mine.
Much like yours.
Way over there.
Like this one.
Yeah.
It's a big backpack, and it's heavy.
It is.
So I thought I need a small thing that I can hold my laptop in. So I went on ThinkGeek, and sure enough, the Yoda backpack has a pouch that is 11 3/4 inch deep, and the beautiful MacBook Air 13-inch is 13 inches diagonal, which means it's 11 1/4 inches this way. So I went to ThinkGeek, bought it, and what better way to learn how to do software development than from Yoda?
That's right. There's no try.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, I went on and it's worked out well. People like it, and it's very convenient. It's light.
Yeah, it looks it.
So
cool.
It's fun.
Well, thanks for talking with us.
Oh, thanks a lot, Paul.